So let me straight away jump into a very, I would say, a good loosener question for you.
Right.
During your long period with Levers and PepsiCo, there were two or three situations when you were thrown into, call them struggling early stage startup enterprises. One I was told was in Gujarat when Mr. Sinha, your one of your mentors, I'm told, sent you to turn around some bottling plant there. Another was in Philippines where you had to turn around again a company which was in red, and you did a remarkable job. So, looking at them as startups, what were some of those learnings which you can share with our audience today?
So Ajay, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on this session. But I'm delighted with the audience because one thing that I love is the youth today, and especially these young, startup, guys who've started these companies, and some of them have got unicorn status, etc. So I'm delighted with that audience. So I'll try and make sure that I bring some lessons out for them as we go through this discussion. So let's start with what you asked me. So the first was Gujarat. This is when I was 32 years old. I finished working with Unilever. My session in Unilever was about 7, 8 years. Unilever was a very structured organization, and it was easy to go above and beyond because the system would take care of everything that you were doing. And from there, I moved to, and the person responsible for taking me to Pepsi was, you'll know him better than I do, Mickey Pant, who was my boss in Unilever. So Mickey took me there, and suddenly from a very, very organized, very stable company, here I was in a company which was completely tumultuous, was a startup in India, had a turnover of about 25 crores at that point in time, which was PepsiCo. We'd had a complete startup mindset guy who was Ramesh Vangal as the CEO, but Ramesh had moved out, and we had a very seasoned, very organized Suman Sinha who'd come in to operate as the CEO of the company. And I was handling the franchise operation for the company. And one fine day, I was called by Suman, and he said that I've identified Gujarat as our next bet. We've decided that we've got to get somewhere as far as Gujarat is concerned. We currently have a 1% share. We've managed a pretty good share in other parts of the country, but in this part of the country, we've not been able to manage anything. So I would want you to go there. But before I do that, I would like to tell you that I've bought over the bottler of Coca-Cola there. Unfortunately, Coke has done a case on us, and as a result of that, whatever we have, we cannot use for the next 3 years. So I said, then what am I going to do there? I don't have a bottling plant. I don't have people. What am I going to do there? He said, I don't know. You go there and figure out. So that's how my, the Gujarat stint started. So I take the next flight and off I go to Ahmedabad. Get there, we've got two lovely plants, but can't use them because there's a case against us which has been filed by a competitor. We have people who you can meet, but they can't operate with you. They can't run the business because of the case. So here I am, supposedly to run an operation which does not exist. So that started my journey. We had earlier we used to have a plant in Ahmedabad which we sold to a company which was a Surat-based company. And so I went to Abbas Hajuri was the guy's name who used to run that company. So I go to him and say that please can you let me use the plant. And obviously he used to make this brand called Socio. He started to make his product out there, etc. Somehow, long story short, somehow convinced him to sell that plant back to us. didn't have people to run it. There was almost 1 foot of bird shit in that plant. Hired people, temporaries, etc., cleaned the plant, was everything rolled into one. Plant manager, sales manager, finance manager, everything rolled into one. The whole day we would clean the plant, we would, try to run it, etc. And that's how the journey started, right? And I remember days and days. I remember at a stretch there were 4 days when all of us didn't sleep. We were running the plant because there were shutdowns happening, breakdowns happening, running the plant. We were loading trucks, we were sending product out, etc., etc. So it was again, it was about getting the right team into place, getting the passion going for the team, and making sure that they see something which nobody had seen in Gujarat till then. And lo and behold, in a year, we reached 49% share. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, and that was probably, the first, a 32-year-old seeing first big success in life. And that's what built my building blocks as an individual, as a manager.
Brilliant. My takeout, if I was in the audience, would be first to think, the word which you used was mazdoor. The second, what I'm hearing is that roll up your sleeves, and there is no difference between you as the leader and your team. And what we have always read about, what you keep saying is, I have long hours. So don't shirk from hard work. Don't be hierarchical. Everybody is at the same level when it comes to turning around companies, and execution, flawless execution, like a mazdoor, not always be, up in the air as a strategist. Brilliant, brilliant takeouts. So from there on, Varun, in 2013 is when you were stepping into this big job in Britannia. You were walking in the shoes of Vinita Bali, the legendary Vinita Bali, which must not have been easy. But clearly, you had your own mandate, your own dreams, and so on. So, how did you craft these dreams? Some before and after, some after joining. And more importantly, what were these dreams, and how did the whole team get involved in these dreams? Because often the CEO may dream about something, but deep below, the guys are oblivious of this dream. How did you democratize this dream to the team? The people in our, in our the delegates who are with us today clearly may be finding it difficult that they start with a great idea, but they don't know how to disseminate, how to kind of bring that dream down to the grassroots levels.
So, first of all, when I joined Britannia, it was because it was, as I saw it, it was a diamond in the rough. I had grown up seeing Britannia as one of the strongest, FMCG companies in India. The distribution was legendary. People, you always heard about the Britannia folks who were great marketeers, great salespeople, people that I had worked with in different parts of my career, whether it was HUL or it was Pepsi. And I was extremely impressed with what Britannia had done over the last 80, 90 years of existence in India. So, but of late, there was some amount of pressure which was showing. And if you go to the market, you obviously notice there was some amount of pressure as far as distribution was concerned. There was some amount of competitive pressure with ITC coming in, bringing in their portfolio of products, a lot of small competitors emerging, etc. So I'd seen that, but I could see that this company could really surge ahead even amongst these headwinds, and that was the reason that I joined Britannia. And as I came in, it unfolded exactly as I saw it. It wasn't rocket science. It was a simple solution which had to be applied to the company. And obviously, as I came in, the first thing that I did was to evaluate people, right? Uh, and as I realized, it had become a little siloized. There were silos in which people were operating. It had become a little bureaucratic. People, senior management, junior management, middle management was clearly emerging as layers within the organization. So I think it was the people agenda was very, very critical, and there were a lot of hires from outside who were not gelling with the people who had worked in Britannia for years and years. So it was very tempting for me to, I'd worked with some of the best people in the industry, and it was very tempting for me to get people from outside and fill in some of the, positions which were vacant at that point in time. But that was one decision that I took, and I think it was a very valuable decision that I will not bring anyone from outside unless my back is completely to the wall. And we coined a term called Britannia for Britannians. We said that we will give the opportunity to a person from within Britannia, even if he or she was 70%, 75% ready. We would take on the burden of developing them, making sure that we get them to that level where they start to perform at whatever level we want them to. So out of my 13 direct reports, there were only two who were from outside Britannia. 11 were from within Britannia, and that worked just wonderfully because people felt very motivated. People felt that and there were very young people who were 2 or 3 levels below me, who were taken and put as a direct report for me, handling a whole function because they had the capability. I was going very clearly by the fundamental, thing about whether should I choose the brain power or the number of years of experience, and I went for brain power. If the person had the capability to run something, then he or she was given the opportunity to do so. So that was, I think, the first move which I made, and I think it was a move which resonated with the entire company because everyone thought that they had a chance to do a much bigger job as they went forward. And even compared to their peers in other companies, they were performing much larger jobs because they were at higher levels compared to what these guys were in maybe in different larger companies. Identifying what were the issues, clearly distribution was an issue. We'd become too primary centric. We'd gone away from the partnership model with distributors and making sure that distributors are part of the family. We just thought we were just thinking about selling to the distributors and not thinking of selling from the distributor to the retail outlet. Brought that retail thinking. We started to look at more and more outlets where we could distribute rather than going through wholesalers. That also helped us with our cost because wholesalers are more expensive. So thus began the journey. We were supporting too many brands. We, sifted it down to 6 mega brands that we would support so that we could support them with bigger monies. Innovation, we were not doing the kind of innovation that we'd done in the past. So we created a R&D center, which was world-class R&D center, and we started to do world-class innovation as well. So all of this, and then finally, the most important from a bottom line perspective was bringing in a cost efficiency mindset, and I think that was the one that tilted the scales in our favor as far as the bottom line was concerned. We were able to create a team which had this mindset of this is my money, I've got to save every penny that I can. And I think it was this teamwork which took us to the next level.
Excellent. I mean, what I'm hearing is that it was strategic and executional, a mix of both. Something to do with distribution, your judgment on people and how you decided to create a high performance team out of your existing team, and not bringing anybody from outside which would probably intimidate or send the wrong kind of messages to the team, I think is a excellent point. And how innovation and cost efficiencies, a mix of both, to bring in consumer value as well as internally make sure that the company becomes that much more you know uh, I would say innovative. One question which I have here for you is, whatever you were deciding, partly you walked in with and partly you understood while when you came in, how did you make sure that this dream was actually, everybody was dreaming it the same way? Often, entrepreneurs, as I said earlier also, they have a dream, but it remains their dream, and as a result, every other employee is thinking on their own. How did you democratize this thinking that look, this is where we need to get to?
That's a good question, Ajay, because it wasn't just my team, it was also the board, right? So
Right,
it was very important for me to create a trust with the board. And what used to happen in the past was that for the board meetings as well as for the excom meetings which happened with the chairman of the board, it was just the CFO and the managing director who used to go. I started to take my entire team, right? My direct reports, I would take them for this meeting. It was very painful in the beginning because they had to go through excruciating questioning, etc., etc. And they used to ask me, "Do you really want us there?" But yes, I wanted them there because what I wanted was I wanted to create a feeling of trust between not just me and my team or me and the board, but my team and the board. So, and it took a long time. Believe me, it wasn't easy. It took us at least a year for the board to start feeling comfortable with this team operating on the ground and trust their thinking and their their business sense on how they're going to move forward. Once that was done, it was very important to get a common dream, common vision going for the team, and that is a very important part of leadership. It was very tough because as I told you, there was a little bit of siloization within the organization. So getting everyone together, getting everyone to think in one direction, getting everyone to make sure that they push the same button for the organization and not just for their own function or for their own good was not easy. But I think it took a long time, but about multiple discussions, multiple meetings, talking about the vision, talking about the theme, talking about optimism, talking about making sure that everyone understood, that we are looking at success, and we are not just looking at some ordinary success. We're looking at
right.
some stupendous success,
So
and
in some ways, sorry. So in some ways, what I'm hearing is probably even bordering to over communication sometimes, but bringing in the point home with the team that look, this is what should be that glorious destination for Britannia, and we are all into it together. Everybody will contribute and move forward. Is
yeah.
that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Brilliant,
And
brilliant.
Ajay, there's a saying by Winston Churchill where he says that a pessimist sees the difficult in every opportunity, and an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty.
Difficulty. Well said. Well said. I don't have much regard for Mr. Churchill, but it's a great saying. It's a great saying nonetheless. You know, in the audience today, one of
Yeah,
the things which they face is
yeah,
something which I believe you are a master at.
yeah,
From a 20 crore, 30 crore idea, all of them want to become a 500,000, 2,000 crore idea. You
yeah.
joined in 2013, and I think Britannia's sales probably went many-fold in this period. EBITDA went many-fold and so on. Tell us, tell the audience today, tell our friends today who are listening to us that what happens during this scaling up operation? What should they watch out for? For example, I can go back to my days when in Domino's we had scaled up and we realized that how culture starts disintegrating when you start growing too fast. So you have to hold it tight with your own hands. Sometimes inefficiencies start creeping in. Just to name a few, what would be your mantra of so-called scaling up and what to watch out for when you're scaling up?
So my first mantra is that we should not worry about the valuation of the company. While you're scaling up, if the valuation goes up, so in our case, it went from zero point 0.8 billion to almost $14 billion or $13 billion. So if we had started to think about that, that we are going to take this from this level to this level, I think we would have definitely failed. So shareholder value is a result. It cannot be a strategy, right? So that's the first thing, and that I think is one thing that startups need to learn, because it's all, God lies in the execution. I think it's very important to make sure that you think about building a company and not think about building shareholder value as you start, or a valuation of your company as you start. I don't think that that is your objective. Your objective is to build a business. So I think that I would say is the first mantra, and I'm trying to modify my points of view, keeping the audience in mind, Ajay. See how nimble I
Sure.
am. So
Absolutely.
so that's my first thing. Second is, I think the pushes and pulls that happen, and every business will have a crisis. It's not that any business can go without a crisis forever. There will always be a bump in the road. When that bump in the road comes, if people start to point fingers at each other and start to look in different directions, then you've broken whatever you built. Because after that, the trust is gone. The job of the leader is that when that bump in the road comes, keep the troops feeling calm, composed, and not start to beat them up and start to, say what the hell is this and how the hell can we let that happen, because that will just disintegrate the team completely. I'm not saying that you've got to be soft. You've got to be tough. You've got to demand what you demand, right? It's not about being soft on people, but it's about keeping them, if you're sure that whatever is happening with a reason, and it can be reversible and it can be corrected, then keep the troops together and make sure that you keep marching in the same direction together. I think that's the second thing. Third is, I think consumer is finally the most important person in this whole equation. If you are not doing the right things by the consumer, then course correction is very important, right? And there will be points when you do things in a hurry, and from a consumer standpoint, you move in the wrong direction. So stop in your tracks, take some hard calls, and make sure you do whatever is necessary to get the train back on track. So I would say, those would be the three. And fourth is that building brands is not easy. The toughest task, and probably the most underrated task that I think people don't understand the gravity of, is how difficult it is to build brands. So you've got to keep the
Let me
focus. Yeah.
let me quiz you further on this brand. And I love this, and I've heard about your views on how Britannia was a trusted brand, and it kind of took leveraged that trust, in the consumer's mind, even during this COVID. Please tell our, our august audience today, how do you build trust in brands? A lot of them are owning these small brands which are doing well, but they have dreams of making big brands. How do brands build trust? What are some of those attributes? And if we take Britannia's example in particular, what have you done in that, especially in the last 7, 8 years, where you have launched a lot of new products, new categories, and to keep building trust in each such subcategory, while the motherhood brand Britannia is overarching, give us some idea about how to build these trusted brands.
See, I would not take any credit for building brands in Britannia. I've only nurtured brands. These brands have been built over the years. It's a 100-year-old company, and whoever has done the brand building in this company has done a fantastic. So my advice to all of the people who are watching this, talk, will be that do right by the brand. Make sure that your proposition, as far as the brand is concerned, is deep, right? You've got to think about two things, right? Uh, when a consumer, well, from a brand standpoint, right? So I'm the brand. Uh, there are two questions that you have to answer for yourself, right? First question is, who am I, right? So you have to answer that question. Who am I, right? If I am, let's say, good day, right? What is it that makes me good day, right? Is it, am I the same as some other biscuit, or is there some differentiation in this? So I think that question has to be answered really well. Who am I? You know, from their brand standpoint. And the second question that needs to be answered, also from the brand standpoint, is why buy me, right? There's a consumer who's looking at the brand. Why would they buy this brand? And why not, some other brand in the same category, right? You have to create differentiation. You have to sometimes create disruption. So if you are able to answer these questions for the brand, you will, move in the right direction.
Excellent. Moving on, you use the word simple, earlier in the conversation, and I've also read and heard about how you believe in keeping things simple. Even the legendary Steve Jobs, had this mantra of keeping things simple. In very simplistic terms, give some mantras to our friends today who are listening to us that in these, call it mother of VUCA times, ambiguous, volatile times, when everything is seemingly so complicated, technology disruptions are happening where the basic models itself, the brick and mortar businesses are also collapsing in some cases. How do you still manage to keep things simple? Give us some simplistic, suggestions, ideas, thoughts on that.
Okay, so in times like this, the first thought should be there's no hindsight bias because you don't know where you're going, right? You've never had COVID before, so you can't look back and say, but this is what I did and this is how it worked. No, there can't be any hindsight bias as you, get into a situation like this. Second, you have to take uncertainty very seriously, right? Uh, there will be uncertainty. You've got to take that seriously and you've got to make sure that you deal with it in a very nice way, right? That's the second mantra. Third is it's all about the passion and the compassion that you set within your team, right? Passion to excel, compassion with what's happening on the ground. If people can, help people, or if there are other people in the story who are disrupted because of a certain situation, if you can help them as well. Today's youth, today's managers feel very good about that. So I think passion and compassion is very, very critical. Uh, Fourth is what I was already talking about, which is the optimist and the pessimist. You have to convert your challenges into opportunities, right? There will be challenges. How do you create them into opportunities? You've got to think about that. And finally, you have to keep connected in a very seamless fashion with the entire team, right? So I think those are the things. If you do that, and obviously, if there is a dearth of what you need, or you need to produce or you need to sell, then prioritization is very, very critical.
Excellent. Before we move on to, what is hot today is how did you respond to the COVID? I have one last section on innovation. Often product innovation for a company as large as Britannia is of critical importance, no doubt. What is the role of innovation, you believe, keeping Britannia, of course, in mind, for smallish companies, which are maybe one product, one category kind of companies, and given there are challenges which can come from disruptors today, uh, how should one build innovation culture in the organization? It may not be as large as a Britannia, it could be a 50 people company, but what would be your advice to CEOs of these companies, that how do you build a culture of innovation in their organization so that everybody is looking at incremental innovation, breakthrough innovation, disruptive also sometimes? Any thoughts on that?
Well, innovation comes in every function within an organization, and it's very important to have a very open-minded thought process as far as innovation is concerned. I personally, Ajay, find today's companies, the smaller companies, to be a lot more innovative than large companies like us. The youngsters today have a much more open mind. The youngsters are looking at things very differently, right from brand names to packaging designs to packaging formats to products, all of that. What I'm seeing today in the market is a lot better than what organized players have done in the past. So I think from a tuning standpoint, the younger generation is much better at thinking innovation than people of our generation. So to that extent, I think it'll only help them as they go forward. But I think the important thing is there is a very thin balance between innovating and innovating over the top, right? There is,
Yes.
you could innovate so much that you kill the business itself, right? I won't name the company, but a retail company, they launched something like 2,000 brands of their own, right? And they are now in serious trouble because they created so much of complexity for themselves that a fantastic company which was going really well, going gangbusters, is now in a position where they don't have cash to run the company, right? So I think it's important that you decide. It's a fewer, bigger, better is always the right way forward. But sometimes you have to do more than that because sometimes you've got to do catch up, etc. But don't take it over the top because if you do, then that will become a millstone around your neck.
Absolutely. No guesses for the right answer on that retail company. I have also a lot of respect for that brand and that company. We wish them good luck still. Let us now jump into what probably some of people in our audience must have been eagerly waiting for. Because Britannia was one company which responded to COVID arguably in the best possible fashion. I mean, March ending quarter, June ending quarter, you produced some outstanding results. One can, argue that look, you were in categories which were poised well, which
Yes.
were home consumption, which were all that. Look, all that, one can say, but there were other companies also who were in the same space. Britannia responded so well to them, and we want to hear that story today. How did that happen? But before that, one quick question: on the day when lockdown happened, when you knew that all your offices and factories and workers, everything was shut, what was your first reaction? Helplessness, panic? As much as, as you said earlier, hindsight benefit you didn't have, you had never faced COVID before. I don't know whether in any of your risk mitigation exercises, COVID used to come up and you had almost, done some drills internally that this is how we will respond when a SARS equivalent COVID comes in.
Yeah.
Tell us, how did you respond on that first day? Did you panic? Were you kind of helpless and shivering?
No, not really. So yes, it was a worry clearly because the business was going to get disrupted. But the first thing I did was, at that time, technology, Zoom calls, etc., was there, but it wasn't happening like it's happening today. But I did set up a Cisco WebEx call with my team. The same day when this happened, we set it up. We discussed what are we going to do. We didn't know what impact this is going to have. We didn't know whether our plants will operate, will not operate, will workers be allowed to come into the plant. But what we discussed were different scenarios that could, which could sort of pan out as we went into this lockdown phase. And I think that started the core of what we did as we went forward. So it was the important thing here is to just remember that we, on the first day, we connected seamlessly as a team. despite being, in different parts of the city, different parts of the country. We connected seamlessly. We discussed the crisis, which we didn't know how it's going to sort of become bigger, and how it's going to affect our business. But we connected, and we gave a very calming, we gave a shoulder to each other and said, "Hey, listen, let's not panic. Let's try and look at scenarios. If this happens, this is what we do." And believe me, all of that went out of the window, because none of the scenarios really spanned out. It was a completely different scenario at the end of it. But at least it put us on a track where everyone was thinking in the same direction.
So tell me, after the first day, you found your feet immediately. You did not panic, which is probably the hallmark of a great CEO, great leader. However, daunting the situation may have been. Why do you think Britannia came out eventual winners in this whole thing? Let's leave the category play and products which are geared towards consumer at home alone for a moment. There must have been so many other things also, the untold stories, maybe your adaptability, maybe your resilience. You alluded to it a little while back. Tell us a few things about your culture and a few things about your actual operational things that you did. What did you do at factories? What did you, and so on and so forth. I'm sure there's an interesting story which is going to flow out soon.
Yeah, so the first thing we did, Ajay, was we looked at, so we realized very quickly, within 24 hours, we realized that we are not going to have the production that we require. Second, we are not going to be able to distribute because our distributors will not be able to move out of their warehouses, etc. So it was very important for us to prioritize. So the first decision was about prioritization. So we went by the 80-20 rule. We said that out of our total number of factories, if we were to operate, uh, you know, uh, let's say we start to build our production, it's important that whatever, even if we are operating at 20%, we don't want complexity in that 20%. We want full 20% to be produced, right? And not changeovers by doing different brands, etc. So we use the 80-20 rule. We took the 20% of the brands and the products that would give us 80% of our revenues, and we focused on them. So there were three brands that we went after: Good Day, Mari, and NutriChoice. And we said that for starters, this is what we are going to produce, and we will. And within this, because it's going to be home consumption, we will produce the larger packs. It's not going to be the on-the-go 5 rupee pack, which is going to do well at this point in time. Everyone's looking for a family pack. So that's how we maximized. And we grew from, let's say, 20% to 30% to 40% and finally to 100% production. But till the time we reached 100% production, we were only producing those brands. Now, there were lots of voices in the group who said that, we will lose these brands forever, etc., etc. But it was a hard call. We stayed with it, and that gave us at least a 25% extra production, right, during that period. So that was the first thing. Second was rallying the troops, and I think that was through our, we had a business continuity meeting set up every day. So the way I had structured the meeting was 1 hour in the morning with my team, with a larger team, and then half an hour with every business or every region every day, so that we, in a week, we are connected with everyone in the organization, whether it's the east region or it's the international business or it's the bread business or it's whatever else it is. So that helped us again give each other support and give each other direction on what are the inefficiencies and how do we work on them. And that connectivity worked wonderfully, right? And yeah, you're right. The fact is that we were lucky that we were on the right side of COVID. There were lots of companies which are on the wrong side of COVID, and whatever they do, whether they do business continuity meetings or something else, there's no way that they are going to get any benefit out of it, because their businesses were 100% shut. We were thankfully on the right side of COVID, and we maximized that position by making sure that we prioritize, we make sure that we could stay connected with everyone in the organization. So that's how we went forward.
Excellent. And while all this was happening, I'm sure consumer trends were also changing, some permanently and some probably only for the moment. How did you and your marketing folks who are involved in like assessing how a consumer trends changing, what is your own take on what parts of consumer habits are going to change permanently, whether it is consumption, whether it is the way they consume digital, and as a result again consumption, and so on and so forth. I mean, do you think structurally a lot of things are going to change even for a brick and mortar company like Britannia in the way they see consumer trends?
Well, certainly. I think there were some things that emerged earlier on in the journey, and there are some things that are still emerging. So the first thing that came out was that home consumption is going to be, something that is going to be true for a longish period of time. The reason being that it's something that comes from crowds. People are not going to eat outside, and hence snacking at home is going to be something that people are going to do versus on the go, out of home, on premise, all of that, right? So this was an opportunity for us to take the share of stomach, right, through products which were meant for home consumption rather than out of home, right? That was the first. Second one was about trusted brands, and that emerged very clearly that in a time of crisis, consumer always leans on towards the most trusted brand in the category. So making sure that we put our trusted brands in front of the consumers, we spoke about them in digital, etc., was very critical. Third was this whole trend about hygiene, safety, and health. That was very, very clear that consumers are going to tilt towards products which are, giving them any of the three. So we started to do a lot of R&D work there, and we've got some very exciting products out there now. The fourth one was about shortening the supply chain, right? It was very important that, if there was some ingredient coming from, let's say, Denmark or from China or from Singapore, we started to look for substitutes in the country. It was very important to get the right ingredients from the right part of the world, right part of the country. Second was about shortening our, distance travel to the consumer as well. So that was the fourth. Fifth was the neighborhood store, the importance of the neighborhood store versus modern trade, and hence retail distribution was very, very critical because everyone wanted to shop very close to home, and hence the kirana store became very, very important to consumers. Sixth was about rural versus urban, right? COVID was striking urban more than rural, and hence we had some traction in rural, which we could have, which we can derive if we have the distribution. Luckily, we had built a rural distribution which was fairly solid, and that held us in good stead. And then, finally, this taught us a lot of tricks on value engineering, on cost efficiency, and margin expansion. And that's those are the kind of things that we learned from this phase, and we acted upon them. I think
Excellent.
there are some things which are not going to go away for a long time. One is affordability, right? There is an economic downturn. People are going to be, looking at affordability. Second, health and immunity. And third, at this point in time, it's very important for organizations, individuals to look at sustainability. Because what we've done is it's a fight against Mother Nature, right? When you fight Mother Nature, you can never win, right? So it's just that what should dawn upon you is that you are it's impossible for you to take on this fight unless you improve your own ways of working.
Excellent takeouts there, Varun, on changing consumer trends, and I'm sure there's a lot to learn there. One quick thought from you on distance to consumer. There's a lot of talk about D2C, how even FMCG and otherwise conventional companies going through the usual distribution channels are also looking very, very strongly at D2C. By 2025, there are some forecasts that this will become billions of dollars. What is Britannia's, or what would be your advice to companies, consumer companies sitting in the crowd today, that how should they view D2C? I mean, getting margins out of D2C, I'm sure it's not, it's a costly kind of, channel also. What would be your take on D2C?
See, I personally think that it depends on the kind of product that you are operating with. In companies like us, where we have low unit price products, which are very light, you get a lot of efficiencies by reducing distance to consumer.
Right.
Uh, in Unilever, for instance, it doesn't make that much of a difference because a small tube of their cream would be fairly expensive and not so voluminous. So it depends on your business, and obviously the compromise is many production centers versus one production center and then distribution. For us, what works is many production centers, distance to consumer being low. For other companies, I don't think it's the same. I think what works is one production center with big capacity, and then distance to consumer is not so important.
Right.
Yeah.
A question on survival of the fittest. Often it is said that the mightiest, the strongest survives. But during the COVID times, we have realized that probably the most adaptive would survive the most. And you've also alluded to that a few times during conversations, and I've read it at various places. Culturally, what is your submission to our august audience today? How can organizations make themselves adaptive at a cultural level where they are nimble, as you used the word a little while back, they remain nimble and adaptive? Any mantras there from somebody who runs such a large organization?
Well, my mantra is that the winds and the waves always favor the ablest navigators. Just make sure that you navigate the boat well. You will never get overturned. I think it's important that you understand where the wind is coming from, what angle it's coming from, where the waves are coming from, how are you going to maneuver them. I think if you do that, you'll be in good shape. It's so basically again getting back to God lies in the details. Understand the details, get into them. There's no substitute for hard work. If you do that, you're unbeatable.
Excellent.
Yeah.
uh, Deepak Parekh, if you recall, very early when the COVID, was announced, had said one interesting thing. He says organizations right now are firefighting. They are trying to make sure that they survive. Most organizations went through that phase in the beginning, but at the same time, the optimist in him told him that there's also growth which can't be kind of left behind. So he had suggested that organizations ideally should have two teams navigating them. One which is making sure that the day-to-day execution operations and all that is happening, and the team with a totally different competency and mindset is still focused on growth and figuring out how, as soon as COVID is over, how they can kind of leapfrog. What is your own take? Would you think, would you recommend such a structure? How did Britannia look at it? Or you probably the same team was continued doing things the way they were in the past?
No, so unfortunately, Ajay, we can't afford the luxury of such expenses. So
No, I
we,
mean, I'm talking of a restructuring within where you have skeletal structures, maybe more execution and today, maybe less growth right now. But as things started becoming better and people started going back to growth, I mean, I understand the cost side of it. But if you
yeah.
were to arguably, did you kind of identify such structures or people who were told, look, you only look at growth in future and rest all will manage the existing business?
Well, we have evaluated this, not in the context of COVID, but in the context of becoming a total foods company. That should we have two teams, one managing our current portfolio and one managing what we think should be in our portfolio in the future. And that we are working on fairly seriously, but not in the COVID context.
Okay. Okay, Varun, employees, as we've heard so many times you saying, are your strongest asset. You have always, you know, bet on them, you have always nurtured them, and you believe they are the reason for success. During a time like this, while Britannia may not have gone through that much, of an up and down state, but what would be your advice to our listeners today? Employees, you want them motivated, but at the same time, some people are being made redundant, some people are losing their jobs, and some are being asked to cut down their salaries. How do you handle a situation like this? How do you still keep them motivated and charged up to serve your organization?
That's a difficult one, Ajay. I do understand what you're saying. While we've not gone down that path because we've been doing well, and we haven't cut salaries or we haven't let employees go. But I absolutely understand there are industries and companies where that's happened, and I think it was necessary in certain cases. So I guess you've got to do what you got to do. Finally, you're running a business, and if the business demands, if there is no business and the business demands that you cut down your overheads, then you've got to do it. I guess as long as you're being absolutely impartial about it, and there is no way that everyone's going to be happy, right? In a situation, who's been asked to go is going to be motivated and say, okay, I'm very motivated to go away. And obviously, the employee is going to be very, very upset and very disappointed. Um, but I think that you've got to do what you got to do, and you've got to do it in a way where the person feels that he's not been in any way run down, but it's a demand of the business, and help the person as much as you can in terms of getting back on his or her feet. I think that's the best we can do. Beyond that, I guess the business will finally demand what it requires. And also within the organization, it should be very clear what was the reason and why that person and not the other person. There needs to be absolute transparency on that as well. But I would not suggest that you don't do whatever is necessary, because that I'm very clear about that. You should your fixed cost should be in accordance with your business, your top line.
Do what your business demands and be as transparent as possible. I think excellent messages there. My last question on COVID, before I have a couple of personal questions for you,
Yeah,
is related to collaboration. It's again an employee point.
yeah.
Articles are today being written on how collaboration between employees, especially when they are set up far apart, they are probably working respective homes. They can't physically meet each other. For the CEO, it's that much more a challenge. That pat on the back, which we often use as a colloquial term, is something which is not happening. How in this environment do you usher collaboration? Experts are saying that there is that much more premium on building collaboration today than it was ever before. Your views on that?
No, it's absolutely right. In fact, what I hear from companies that we work with, agencies, all of them, is that this whole situation is creating a lot of stress for employees, especially the younger ones. Right, the lower younger employee has a lot more stress because they have a more active social life. They go out a lot more often, and so there's a lot of stress there, and I think it's very important that you create some stress busters. and you also give certain tools which are required for a comfortable working within the environment of their homes. I think the most important thing is connectivity. The team connectivity, talking to them, providing them help if required, someone who can advise them.
Thank you, Varun. I think we have had an excellent session with Varun Berry, who has given us some outstanding insights into how successful businesses should be run, how you can make big successes out of small ideas. I think his insights on consumer, the importance of consumer insights, what are some of the changing trends as far as consumers are concerned, how creating value for your customers should eventually lead you to creating trusted brands, and how trust that you build between consumers and your brands is probably the most important thing. uh, how in COVID times it is the trust in the brand which actually saves the day, and save the day even for a brand like Britannia. He also talked about the importance of people, that how he would rather bet on people than anybody else. He was not too keen to change people, but convert existing teams into some high performance teams. You can pick up a bunch of Harvard Business School guys and put them in a room, but they may or may not necessarily be the best performing team. So you got to create your high performance teams from your existing resources, not necessarily importing too many people and build insecurities in teams. Uh, During COVID times, the messages he gave with regards to collaboration of employees, execution, excellence, how, the devil is basically the detail of execution, and how you have to be ruthless about it. Tough decisions need to be taken, but leading from the front is very important. I think some really good messages for our team. So thank you, Varun. Thank you very much for being with us. And namaskaram to Varun, and namaskaram to all our delegates. Hope you had a great time. Thank you. Namaskaram.